So we need to draw a triangle DEF. E is your 90-degree angle. So the E has to go here. And then I always put whatever comes first in the alphabet at the top. So that's how I always draw my triangle. So that's my triangle. Go ahead and add all the pieces of information that they gave you. So they did tell you that angle D is 71. And they also said that little e is 25, which would be the hypotenuse. So use that information, building off what we learned yesterday, to find the missing pieces. Starting with what is angle F, and little d. So the 25 is my hypotenuse, and then little d is opposite, and little f is adjacent. So you should have 19 degrees for angle D. Who had 19 degrees for angle D? Okay, good. So now we need to find little f and little d. So because I know the hypotenuse, I'm going to use, to find little f, I'm going to use cosine, because little f is adjacent and I know the hypotenuse. So I have to use cosine to find little f, and sine to find little d, because I will be using opposite and hypotenuse to find little d. So let's go ahead and set up our ratios. So to find side f, I'm going to do, because that's adjacent, I'm using cosine of 71 degrees equals adjacent f over the hypotenuse, 25. And when you cross multiply, you'll have that f equals 25 times the cosine of 71 degrees. Type that in your calculators, make sure it's in degree mode. So D is 19, little f So I got 8.139 for little f. So make sure that's correct, though, because I did these notes yesterday, so. And then to find side D, side D is opposite, and I'm still going to use the hypotenuse. Even though I know the adjacent, I'm going to stick with the given information and do sine. You could also do Pythagorean theorem because you know two sides. But I'm going to stick with trig, so we have the sine of 71 degrees equals opposite over hypotenuse. So D equals 25 times the sine of 71 degrees. And if you take 25 times the sine of 71 degrees, you will get that side D is 23.638. All right, go ahead and read example 6 and draw your triangle. So little a is 11, little b is 15, and we know that C is the right angle, and they want us to find the measure of angle A. So take a minute, see if you can figure out how to find that angle. Angle A is our theta. And because it's an angle, angles are inside, you're going to need to use the inverse. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what trig ratio you're going to use based on the size that they gave you. Are we doing inverse sine, inverse cosine, or inverse tangent? So what ratio do you think we're going to use? Based on the 11 and the 15, what we know, what ratio can we use? Tangent, right? Because we don't know the hypotenuse. So because we don't know the hypotenuse, we know the 15, which is adjacent, and the 11 is opposite. So the tangent, well, angle A is going to equal the inverse tangent of opposite over adjacent. So type that in your calculator. And you should get approximately 36.254 degrees. Take a minute, read example 7, and see if you can find that angle by yourself. So based on what we know and where angle B is located, what ratio are you going to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? So is this side here, would this be adjacent to angle B or opposite of angle B? Adjacent. So we know adjacent, and we know the hypotenuse, so I agree. So to find, so the cosine of angle B equals 4.5 over 12, which means that B is the inverse cosine of 4.5 over 12. Yes. Wait, one more time. How was the 4.5 what? Adjacent? Oh, okay. So this is angle, so little b is opposite. So adjacent is right next to. So if you think of like two things that are adjacent, that means that they're next to each other. Okay, so side A, little a is next to B. So it's not opposite, it's next to B. Little b is opposite. So when you type that in your calculator, angle B equals the inverse cosine of 4.5 over 12, you should get that it is approximately equal to 67.976 degrees. I can't read the last digit. Is that a 6? Okay, did you get that? Who got that answer? All right, so that's right triangle trig. So let's go ahead and start bearing. So I'll give you a second to finish out your notes, and then we're going to go to some word problems. The main thing to know, we'll just do a couple more today because we're really good. We have plenty of time to finish this week. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and draw. So we have north, south, east, and west. And whenever you're asked for a bearing, so right here it's asking for the bearing, that's always the angle formed with vertical, or you could say north-south. So that's the definition of what that is. So we'll do 1 and 2, then we'll end for today. You can have the rest of the period to work on your homework or ask questions. Okay, so we have an airplane. Let me go ahead and draw me a little airplane. You don't have to draw an airplane, but here's my little airplane. So this airplane, first it drove 80 miles south. So south is down, right? So I'm going down this direction, 80 miles. So we went 80 miles to the south. And then it went 95 to the east. So 95 to the east is going 95 this way. So for the word problems, you have to visualize what they're saying. So they're a little trickier. All right, and then it's asking what bearing should be taken to drive directly to the airport. So directly back to the airport. So if the plane is here, directly back to where it started from would be here. So it's asking you what bearing. So the bearing, though, is the angle that is created with the north. So that would be this angle right here. This is our bearing. So the thing about this triangle, though, is that it's really, a triangle is really half of a rectangle. So we can easily enclose this. And that 95 can be put here. And the 80 can also be put here. So using this triangle right here, find my red bearing. So I'll give you a second to see if you can figure out what ratio we're going to use to find this angle. So we don't know the hypotenuse, so we're going to use tangent. So this is my angle here. So that is, this 80 is adjacent to my bearing. The 95 is opposite. So to find my bearing, the tangent of theta is going to equal opposite over adjacent, which means theta is the inverse tangent of 95 over 80. So if you type that in your calculator, you will get 49.899 degrees. Now, whenever you write a bearing, though, a bearing has to have directions on both sides. So when you're writing a bearing, you have the first is going to either be north-south. So you have north-south, and then you have the angle, and then you have east or west. So if I'm going back to the airport, I have to fly opposite of the directions that I used. So initially I went south and east. So to go back, I'm going to go north and west. So this is the correct way to write your bearing. When you write your bearing, you are going to write it as, I'm going to have to write at the very top because I have no space. So you're flying back north, and then you write your angle. And then you're also going back what direction, east or west? Because you're doing opposite of the way you flew originally. So west. This is how you write a bearing. That is the correct answer. Go ahead and read question 2. It's our last question. So this one, it says we went 12 miles to the west. So 12 miles to the west. So west is going to the left. So I'm going this direction for 12 miles. And then I went north, which is up, for 20 miles. So this is the port. This is where the ship is. And it's asking if it wants to head from that point to go back to the port, what is the bearing? So for the ship to go back to the port, what is the bearing? Notice that the angle, because our last direction, we were heading north, our bearing is actually right here. A bearing has to be with the north. So we don't need to create a second triangle. The only time you need to create a second triangle is if your second direction was east or west. So that is your angle that you're trying to find. And most of the time, well, I don't want to say that because as soon as I say that, they're like, well, no, actually, that's wrong. So we won't. I'll leave that part off. So we're going to find our bearing, theta. That is the inverse tangent, or not the inverse tangent. Let me just write the whole thing. So the tangent of my bearing is equal to opposite, which is 12 over 20. Which means that theta equals the inverse tangent of 12 over 20. So go ahead and type that in your calculator. And you should get 30.964. So when you write your bearings, remember, it's always opposite of where you went. So originally, I went to the north. So what do you think I'm going to put on the left side? South. And then what direction goes on this side? Am I going to put east or west? East, because that's opposite of where we went, because we went west. And that is your final answer. All right, go ahead and let's start working on our homework. Tomorrow is Career Speaker Day, so we'll have a shorter class period.